Oh, this is really interesting. Can I read this? Ishikawa said the difficulty of Criterion dungeons is comparable to an 8-player Savage raid, if not harder. So there were also comments that felt that the current rewards aren't motivating enough to attempt the content. FF14's toughest dungeons are here to stay if players want them. We will continue deliberating on the idea to satisfy as many players as possible. I mean, the thing is, right? The fewer people you have at a party, the more challenging you can make the content. In my opinion. Every time you add an additional player, the difficulty has to, like, the difficulty curve has to be, decreasing. So you want to make sure that, like, you'd want Criterions to be quite challenging, but again, they need to have something that's rewarding for the players, or at least the players feel like it's worth their time. What kind of things I've seen a lot of people complain that the rewards aren't good, but I've not seen many people suggest what would be good as a reward. I haven't heard anyone saying they dislike doing the content. I also haven't heard anyone saying that they are satisfied with the reward structure around them. It's also super hard to find even 4 people who want to do them because of the lack of rewards. Luckily, you only have to find 3 people that want to do them. Gears with alternative stats, weekly gear upgrade item would be perfect, untradeable glams, savage level gear or upgrade mats. So you guys just want more gear, things that you can get from elsewhere in the game? Like, you don't want something that quite unique to Criterions? You just be like, oh yeah, give us more gear. Sans Criterions give kinda nothing. Yeah. Glamour is king? I think Glamour is king. A little extra depth in BIS set farming. Yeah, because you'd as a team, you can be like, right, we're like a Savage team of 8 players. All right, we're doing our Savage. Okay, hey, let's break off tonight. Let's go do some Criterions. And you do 4 and 4 for Criterions, and you get some more loot, which is going to progress your Savage, like, light party. I think that's pretty good. I mean, let me just read this article. We're taking 5 anyway, whilst I'm waiting for people to get back. So, with the release of patch 6.2.5, Final Fantasy XIV introduced a wildly popular new feature, Variant and Criterion Dungeons. Variant Dungeons are designed around choice and replayability, focusing on puzzles and branching paths in addition to battle content. I've not looked at Variants yet. Are they fun? That sounds cool, though, like, and they're focusing on replayability. Criterion Dungeons are visually similar but incredibly difficult, on par with Extreme Trials or Savage Raids. Okay. With 2 Variant and Criterion Dungeons now available in 14, the features seem to be a hit with the player base. Heh. The feedback we've received has been positive overall, says battle content designer Masatoshi Ishikawa. I was especially relieved to see many players welcome the concept of Variant Dungeons, which involve smaller groups and plenty of puzzle solving. I actually really like puzzle solving in content. It's something that I think Destiny 2 does very, very well. Alright, we're back. Alright, give me 1 second. So, I actually think puzzle solving is a really cool idea. I really like that. Killing bosses is great, and going through the general dungeon theme is great, but, like, it's nice sometimes to just get a change of pace and just get, like, just something different. Yeah, it's like puzzle solving, not like fights. Yeah. That's fine. You don't always need combat to make something challenging. Like, just having kind of like a mental challenge can be really cool, I think. Following the release of patch 6.45, Final Fantasy XIV FanFest in July, Inverse spoke to Ishikawa and 14 Endwalker Assistant Director Tsuyoshi Yokozawa about the design and philosophy behind Variant and Criterion Dungeons. They also offered some intriguing hints about how these challenges might evolve in the future. That's the main thing, I think, is like, from what I can see coming into Final Fantasy and still being new to it, is give the developers chance, because they will run with something. Like, one thing that I'm liking about the Final Fantasy devs, and this is something that's been weird with WoW for the longest time, is like, the WoW devs will invest in this brand new system, like Island Expeditions, and they'll have this whole new system, and then 2 years later, it's completely scrapped, it's completely gone. And the thing is like, in the development cycle, they start working on the next expansion. Like, they're working on the new expansion upcoming, and they're probably already starting to make a little bit of work on the expansion after that. So they're already working like 2 expansions ahead. So when they design a system, by the time the expansion releases and that system becomes relevant, they've already stopped active development on that system, you know? That's not how DF works, though. How so? They have been making changes. They have been saying, like, dragon riding, for example, they might look to extend that further. But something that I think is a shame is when you put time into you develop a system, you get it where it's sort of like, now it's starting to really gel with players, and then you completely scrap it. Like, just when you start to get the system quite good and enjoyable and engaging, then it's just, like, completely scrapped, and then they move on to the next thing. So something that I think would be good for the Final Fantasy devs, and something that I do see them doing, and at least how it appears to me, I could be completely wrong, but it's like, they create something new, and then they go, alright, we're going to keep doing this now, we're going to keep adding to it, and we're not just going to leave it to kind of, you know, fall off. What has the player reception been like to Variant and Criterion dungeons? How has that reception shaped your future plans? So, moving forward, I'd like to keep what was well received while improving upon the aspects that were inconvenient. Beginning in patch 6.4, the party list shows which variant actions your party members have equipped, which came about from that line of thinking. Criterion dungeons were our first high-end content for smaller groups, and we received a lot of positive feedback from players who enjoyed tackling them with a party of friends. That said, the difficulty of Criterion dungeons is comparable to an 8-player Savage raid, if not harder. Yeah, that's good. That is appropriate. I think that's an appropriate level of difficulty. Slightly harder than 8-man content in, you know, Savage, sure. So there were also comments that felt the current rewards aren't motivating enough to attempt the content. Absolutely. The rewards need to be determined very carefully in relation to rewards for other content, but we will continue deliberating on the idea to satisfy as many players as possible. Yeah, this is important. You need a good reward. That in turn can also fix the issue of replayability. Something can have high replayability because there's a sufficient reward from it. It can also have good replayability because it's an increasing challenge, or it just is fun. Debatable whether it's harder? Sure, debatable, but at least if it's debatable, at least that's in the right ballpark, right? If it was categorically not as challenging, then it wouldn't even, you know, okay. If it's debatable, then that's okay. There are always going to be people who are diehard Savage players who go, nah, man, like, our content's way more difficult. And then they're going to be Criterion players who go, my content's more difficult. It's the same thing that happens in WoW. The Mythic Plus players think that they're better than the Raiders think they're better than the Mythic Plus players, and ultimately both of them suck compared to the PvPers. So, there you go. With the varying difficulty and the branching paths of these dungeons, how much work does it take to get things right? How long are they typically in development? To achieve the right difficulty level, we followed our usual thought process for 4-player dungeons, but also had to remember that parties could have fewer players or lack certain roles. Since variant dungeons were meant to feel like a typical 4-player dungeon with any party composition, we built a new system in which all 3 roles are weighed equally, and the difficulty only changes based on the number of participants. We began development somewhere between 1 to 1.5 patches earlier than usual in order to build the new system, its branching paths, and the accompanying NPCs animations. Yeah, cool. So I'm trying to get from that, they're trying to say that they want, like, every role to feel like it's a good, solid, like, challenge and engagement, yeah? Building the new system was a one-off task, but future variant dungeons still have to be balanced for 1 to 4 participants, various different paths, and more, so they'd still require a lot more work than a standard 4-player dungeon. The difference is especially apparent with background design, since the additional paths directly translate to more work to be done. Okay. Variants are nice, it scales freely. I need to look at a variant. I've not seen what they look like. At the same time, it might spoil it if it's like more of a puzzle. The problem with something being like a puzzle and being like a challenge in that sense is once you know how to do it once, you're going to always know how to do it, which can reduce its replayability. But apparently they say with variants that they're replayable. And the name is in the thing, variant. So you're assuming that it's always going to be a little bit different every time, but I'll keep that as a little bit of a mystery for now. How do you design the bosses for variant and Criterion dungeons? How is it different from the boss design in standard dungeons? By the way, we are almost done with this post, and then we'll get back to rating. Designing bosses for variant and regular dungeons involves the same overall process. We're provided with the boss's lore, which we use to rough out its main concept, and then brainstorm its main mechanics. So the main difference... I really like that. That's a really good process. Start with the lore, start with what it should be like, and then design from there. Design up. Say the main differences with variant dungeons are planning out the branching paths and their associated mechanics, as well as creating mechanics that can be resolved regardless of party size. So variants, is there different, like, can you have 8 players in variants, or, like, you just have multiple different group compositions? Is it flexible group comp? It's 1 to 4. Ah, okay. Right, I see now. Okay, some of these things start to make a bit more sense. Okay, that's cool. Bosses are usually designed with only their lore in mind. Yeah, because they need to make it doable as a healer, a tank, and a DPS. Yeah, so As a healer, you need to be able to have enough damage for say the DPS check or whatever. As a tank, you need to be able to have enough damage as well. And then as a DPS, you need to have enough sustain and healing and defensives and yeah. And you need to be able to do it as 4 healers, 4 tanks, 4 DPS. Yeah. Every combination. That's a really difficult design challenge in my opinion. So kudos to them for getting that right. I guess what you ultimately do is lower the difficulty, and that makes it easier to design around. But bosses usually designed with only their lore in mind, so creating battle mechanics that were indirectly related to the boss, like turning a dial switch located elsewhere in the dungeon, proved to be a challenge for many of our staff. Furthermore, we had certain limitations to work with, for example, considering how players might choose to participate solo. We couldn't use mechanics that required multiple players to stack together or spread out, or like you have to go stand on 2 different like floor like pads to activate the next thing, Criterion dungeons bosses are even more challenging to design. It's somewhat similar to designing 8-player raids in that we're creating 2 separate difficulties, but variant dungeons are about as hard as a 4-player dungeon, whereas Criterion dungeons are equivalent to Savage. So the difficulty gap between normal and Savage raids pales in comparison. Creating bosses for Criterion dungeons required staff members who not only could retool variant dungeon mechanics and resourcify in content, but also keep the necessary development resources under control. Yeah, very, like, you know, it's nice that they're alluding to, like, the design challenge, the developer challenge. It's not easy, like, I play dungeons all day. I couldn't come up with, like, just a list of really good ideas of stuff. To have, like, innovation in that, just new ideas, really impressive. Notable aspect of Criterion dungeons, or more accurately the difference between 4-player and 8-player content, is how there's only 1 tank and 1 healer, and individual DPS players have more responsibility. No tank swaps meant more emphasis on positioning enemies or having tanks stand in front of the party. The healer could be a pure or barrier healer, so we had to design more for mechanics rather than incoming damage. That's really interesting, yeah. This is where, because, like, the way that FF classes are designed is quite interesting. Like, the way the combat is you don't really have tons of utility. Whereas, like, in WoW, you'd go, like, okay, well, you're always going to have a healer with Dispel. You're always going to have, like, at least, you know, a handful of CC abilities within a group. So that's quite interesting. Furthermore, we had to place a restriction on raises to avoid a disparity between DPS jobs with and without access to raise. With all that said, there are also advantages designing mechanics that require determining party member priority, and giving each player an equal amount of responsibility were easier with the smaller party size. So this is really important as well. So there's a big thing issue in like WoW where, oh, we need a Bloodlust, which is basically like LB. We need a Bloodlust. We don't want to do this dungeon without a Bloodlust. Or we need somebody who can battle res. Because in WoW, not everyone can battle res, so you need, and I mean, I guess same in FF, but you, like, need to form a group around having access to battle res, having access to Bloodlust, having access to a couple different types of utility, and so if you don't have that, it can be really, like, frustrating as a group, where you want to play in a composition with all of your friends, and you want to play, like, the things you enjoy, but you're limited because you need that utility. If you reduce the amount of requirement on raise, then that lessens the requirement there, and allows for more variety. Do you have any plans to evolve or change the formula for Variant and Criterion dungeons? Can we expect Variant and Criterion to stick around throughout 7.0? And have you thought about new jobs might work in previous Variant dungeons? We don't have plans to change their fundamental formula at the moment, but as we release more Variant dungeons, we might find something we're lacking or could improve, which we'd like to address with flexibility. And of course, we plan on having the new jobs coming with the next expansion to be fully playable in Variant and Criterion dungeons, just as we've done with Deep Dungeons and other content. As for the future Variant and Criterion dungeons in 7.0 and beyond, it'll depend on the feedback we receive from our players. So for now, we'd like to hear your thoughts and comments after playing through Mount Rock-On and the 3rd dungeon, which is currently in development. I think the biggest thing for me is like that they're trying to make it an evergreen system. They're trying to continue its development and not just go, okay, that was fun for this expansion, let's move on. I've not done a Criterion yet, but I have a lot of faith in them being a very good system as time goes by. And so what's your main issue then? What's like everyone's main issue? Is it the lack of reward? Because fixing the reward system will also fix its replayability. Because the two things that are important with that kind of system is A, you want it to be replayable and incentivized. B, you want it to feel rewarding. And those two things kind of, you know, they have a lot of correlation with one another. They kind of go hand in hand. For me in my WoW brain, the idea is like, oh, well, why don't we do like a scaling system and you have like a Mythic plus level, where maybe the Criterion base level is like a lot easier than it is now, but it scales up and scales up and scales up. But I don't know how that would work in Final Fantasy, because the combat design is just like so different, and you don't want like Raider IO in FF. You just don't want it. I love Raider IO for WoW, but you wouldn't want it in this game, period. It's just so interesting when you have to approach, because the combat is so different, you have to approach the solution to each problem very differently from what my like WoW brain would do. Yeah, so it seems like very easy fixes. They're going to continue making Criterions, it looks like, if the players are happy, which I think they're going to try and work on the rewards, right? But it looks like they are going to continue making Criterion content. I think a Mythic Plus system in Final Fantasy would be interesting, but I also don't know that it would work. I'll be honest, the more I'm playing Final Fantasy, the more I don't think Mythic Plus would work with WoW's combat design. With Final Fantasy, I don't know how it would work. Because in WoW, you have a lot of utility. You have stuns, interrupts, CCs, and it gets to a point where in lower level dungeons, it doesn't matter whether you use your abilities or not, things won't kill you. But when you start to get into higher level dungeons, you need to stop and prevent more and more things. And that is the battle. It's the mechanical challenge of affecting, interrupting mobs, right? Whereas in Final Fantasy, it's like dodge out of that thing on the ground. I don't know how you increase the complexity of that in higher level dungeons without actually artificially adjusting the design. Maybe if you did like a Criterion tier system, kind of like, so you do like a +5 and a +10, and the difference between a +5 and a +10, it's exactly the same, except a +10 maybe has additional mechanics layered on top, or you have lesser time to react or something, and then a +15 is same as like a +10, but then with a little bit more added on. And maybe you'd kind of do it like that. So instead of doing like a +2 all the way up into infinite scaling, it would be like a tier system, and each one has like mechanical differences, sort of like an increase in difficulty from like extreme to savage to ultimate, but like a slower ramp up over time. Yeah, we have interrupts, yeah, Ray, but not in the same way. Like, you've played WoW, right? Yeah. So you know WoW Mythic Plus. It's very different. Like, that I could go on and on the list, but there's so much more group utility that you have in WoW compared to FF. It's very, there's a lot more in WoW, but that's how the combat's designed. People have been saying about adding Savage quality gear to Criterion, so you'd get like an extra piece each week or something. I don't quite know how the gearing system 100% works in FF in terms of the, like, you get one piece per Savage per week, I think. But is that guaranteed? I think that's guaranteed, right? Not guaranteed? Right, okay. But you can get a piece. I think people these days want deterministic loot. Like, they want to know, even if it was like, hey, here's a token and after 2 weeks you can buy a piece of loot. At least you know that you're going to be getting it. I mean, the thing to consider, right, is I think when you're figuring out the gearing system in this game, it needs to not be too quick for people who only play one job, because if it's too quick, that can be bad. But you don't want it to be too long for people that play several jobs, because and it's the fine balance. But you probably should be getting a piece of gear every single week, guaranteed one piece of gear. If you're really lucky, maybe you get two. If you're really lucky, but you're guaranteed one. And then that way, if you play other jobs, then it's like, okay, I'm actually gearing up my alt job, which is really good. Because maybe on Savage, you like to be a DPS, but in Criterions, you like to be a tank. And you need to get 2 different gear sets going on. And I think that's where they need to do the fine balance. I imagine that the developers are listening. I'll be honest, from everything I'm gauging from the team, it seems like they are listening. They put out a post that said, hey, we hear you, you want them to be more rewarding. Okay. Like, I know you guys have frustrations, but I don't think you understand how good you have it in Final Fantasy. Like, it seems like the devs are just like, alright, yeah, we'll do that. You want it to be better? Okay, we'll do it. I think give the devs some time on the Criterion. I think it was a new system. They weren't 100% sure how they wanted it to be yet. And imagine, right? Imagine to be devil's advocate, or Square Enix's advocate, to be Yoshi P's advocate, imagine they release Criterion, a new system, and people don't like it. And then you're forced to go and do it for more gear. That could cause problems, and that could cause tension. Or, imagine if it gave gear, like really good rewards, and then people go and do it, and the gearing system is too quick, and then the other raid content, which has been the bulk content for a long time in this game, just gets completely just like, goes to shit, people clear it way too quick, and then you're deprived of content for even longer. So to play devil's advocate, maybe they introduce a system to see the lay of the land, make an incremental change, test the waters, and then go, right, we know how this is going to affect things now, we know how this is going to work, now let's implement it fully. That's what I would think when I think about Criterion and that kind of content for the devs. And that's what I would mentally how I would mentally approach the situation. Plus, your Criterions haven't taken feedback into account. I personally think it's likely that they'll take feedback into... Yeah, there's no way. Like, by the time... They were working on the second Criterion when they were already because they did the first one and then they released the second one a little bit later, right? So I'm right in thinking that then the way development cycles work, they were already working on both at the same time. When they released the first one, the second one was already in development. It was probably too late to pivot in any capacity. The third Criterion, or any Criterion that gets released next expansion, I imagine will be a lot better. First of all, it'll be better for the game. Like, it'll be better fit into the game. They'll understand what kind of mechanics they want to do, kind of like difficulty ramp up. But also, I think the rewards will be better there. And the reason, like, I don't know anything about, like, how Criterions have gone and stuff. But what I do know is Mythic Plus and WoW. And I know the development cycle, and I know how they implement stuff there, and I know the effects that it can have on the other systems of the game. If you make in Mythic Plus trinkets that are way too good, then people that raid go, oh, I'm forced to go into Mythic Plus now. I don't want to go into Mythic Plus. Now you're making me go into Mythic Plus. What the hell, Blizzard? And then Mythic Plus players, they look at raid when there's really good raiding trinkets, and they go, oh, you're making us go into raid. What the hell? I just want to do Mythic Plus. So introducing Criterions is that exact same thing, where they're like, oh, we don't want to force anyone to have to feel like they have to go do this thing. But that's what I think.